In this video, I'm going to be walking you through automating sub-items and creating sequential sub-items inside of Monday.com. By the way, if you'd like us to help you set up Monday.com for your business, check out the link in the description below. Anyway, as you can see here, I'm inside of my example Monday.com system. Now, like I said, in today's video, we are automatically creating sub-items dependent on different things, and also creating a sequence of sub-items. So first and foremost, let me walk you through our basic setup. As you can see here, I'm on a tasks board, okay? So what I want to initially happen is when a new task is created, sub-items, just set standard number of sub-items are going to be automatically created for that particular task here. So if I open the drop-down menu, I can go ahead and write in a new sub-item. So let's just write in an example one or example sub-items. And I've got a few data points. Of course, we can add a few additional ones as well as we go through this video. But just to start with, all we would need to do is go to automate, top right-hand corner, create automation. And then all we need to do is when item is created, then create sub-item. That's literally it. You can leave the video now. When an item is created, create a sub-item. Okay. So I don't know why that's expanded really weirdly, but you would then go ahead and write in the name of that sub-item. So this is obviously the sub-item name. So I call this example sub-item number 1. We can also then assign an owner. So this would be just a set owner for this particular sub-item every time this sub-item runs. We can also define a status as well. And then we have a date column. Now, quite interesting with the date column because I'll come on to that in a moment's time. But let's just go ahead and create the automation to begin with. So if I go back to my board, close this down and go ahead and I'll just write in example sub-item task, hit enter. What should happen is that sub-item should automatically create, subject to this all working, which it should do. And then the data from the sub-item automation that we set should also automatically populate. So you can see here that sub-item is just created now. It's assigned it to myself, set the status as AA. The date column is blank. Now, with sub-items and date columns, it's a little bit complex in the sense that if I go into my automation, and when I go to when an item is created, then create a sub-item. And then I click into the date column and I set this as the 4th, as an example. It's going to always set the due date or the date column as the 4th of December 2025. It's not going to do it for in 2 weeks time or in a week's time or in 3 weeks time or whatever you want. It's always going to be the day that you set it. So that is not a particularly ideal way of approaching things. So what I would often do is I would kind of create a blanket statement of sorts. And I would say, create automation when a sub-item is created. So this is the sub-item or every sub-item. Then set date column to today. So that would be the due date, or in this case, not the due date, the date column on the sub-item level. And then I would go push date. So this is how to then move the date along by a series of days. So I then push the date by, and then I can choose between months, weeks, days, and business days. So I'd let's say 5 business days and then go ahead and press set. So now if I create a new item, it's going to create a sub-item. That sub-item creation is then going to trigger the automation to set the date to today and then push it by 5 working days. So if I go to example sub-item task number 2, hit enter, that should then populate my sub-item. If I just use the drop down, there you go, that's now populated. Should then set the date to today and then in 5 working days time, which is the 11th of December. So that worked well. Now, where it gets a little bit more confusing is if you want different dates dependent on, what a lot of clients request is a staggered approach. So they would have sub-item number 1 would be the 11th, then sub-item number 2 would be the 15th, and sub-item number 3 would be the 18th, as an example. Okay, so I'll come on to how to handle that later on in this video. But the next thing that people often want to do is they would have their standard sub-items populate for every single task or every single project or every single client. But they might also want some sub-items to populate dependent on a certain data point. So let me give you an example. Let's say I have a status column here, and this is my task type. And I want a particular sub-item to populate if the task type is equal to, let's say, finance. And then we might have a marketing task type as well. So we've got a couple of different options here. So we've got finance, marketing. There we go. So task type. If an item is created and the task type is equal to finance, then I want a particular sub item to be created on top of the standard sub items that we already have set up. So I'll go to automate, top right hand corner here, and I would leave this. So when an item is created, create a sub item. I would then go to create automation when item is created and only if. So I'm pressing the plus button on the trigger and saying, and only if status task type is equal to finance, then create sub item. Okay. So I'm then saying this is going to be, I don't know why this is being all weird. This is going to be finance sub item. And then again, I can assign an owner. So let's say I'll assign this to Alex, status AA again. I'm not going to do anything with the date column. Now, you also might have multiple sub items for the finance task. So you can then create another sub item when an item is created and the task type is equal to finance. So you can create as many sub items as you want. So this is finance sub item number 2. And again, this might be assigned to me, status AA again, because we've only got that. And then I'll go ahead and press create automation. So now if I just close this down and I make this a required column. So in order to create a new item, I have to enter that in. And then I go ahead and I create example sub item task number 3. And I set the task type to finance, create task. What is going to happen is those standard sub items are going to populate automatically, as you can see, and also the finance sub items should populate as well. So finance sub item and finance sub item number 2, and example item number 1 or sub item number 1, and assigned to the different people. Now you will then notice that the due date has been populated for all of them in exactly the same way. So it's set date to today plus 5 working days. Okay, which, yes, a bit frustrating, but you know, that's what we're working towards resolving. So that's how to automatically create sub items, and then also create sub items dependent on a variable. So if the task type is equal to finance, then we create sub items. Of course, that can be applied to literally anything as well. So then the next thing that I want to look at is how to create a sequence of sub items. So the theory being that sub item number 1 will be created once sub item number 1 is marked as completed, and only when sub item 1 is marked as completed, then sub item 2 will be created, and we'd follow this sequence. This in turn will also resolve the date issue, in the sense that when sub item number 1 is marked as completed, and only when it's completed, then the new sub item will be created, and that could be in a few days time, and then set the date to be completed in 5 working days from the day in which the previous sub item was marked as done. Okay, confusing, I know, but what we're firstly going to go ahead and do is just go to automate, and we'll turn off when an item is created, create a sub item, and also when an item is created and only if task type is finance, create a sub item. So we don't want those to populate for the time being. So when we create a new item, no sub items are going to be populated. The next thing that we want to do is we want to add a numbers column or a text column. I would probably go numbers column. This is going to act as our sequence filter. So sequence, I'll just call it sequence number as an example. So what will happen is when the first sub item is created, we're going to put in automatically the sequence number as being sequence number 1. Then what will happen is when the sub item status is marked as done, and only if sequence number is equal to number 1, then we will create sub item number 2, and that will be sequence number 2. So this can go on forever. There are a lot of automations associated with this, but this in theory is how to create a sub item sequence. Okay, so let me just delete all of these for the time being. There we go. It's not letting me. There we go. Oh, it's just not letting me. I'm just going to hit refresh. I just want to clear everything so it's easy to comprehend what's going on. So just delete everything here. So we go to automate, top right hand corner. Now the first automation that we're going to run is when an item is created, create a sub item. So we've already got this turned off. We can just, but it's created. So we can click into this and say, when an item is created, create the first sub item. We'll keep example. We'll change this to sub item just so it's super clear. item number 1. But then here, where we've added this numbers column, the sequence, we're going to put the value of 1 into this, okay? And then just all we need to do is hit update automation, and we can turn that automation on. So when a new item is created, it's going to create sub item number 1, and also it's going to set the due date for 5 business days time, okay? Just the standard automation that we set up earlier. So that should be now on. There we go. Cool. So the next automation that we want to do is create automation again when sub item status changes. Sub item status, the status being the status column, changes to, let's say, hang on. Let's go to sub items quickly. We'll just create this task. Finance, sure. And then I just want to add a sub item status value of done as an example. So we'll just go done here. Okay. That would be useful. Should have thought about that. So automate again. All we're going to do is create automation, and we're going to say when sub item status changes to done, and only if the number meets condition, and only if the sequence number is equal to 1, then we are going to create a sub item. And we could even create multiple sub items if we wanted to, then create a sub item. This is going to be example, I don't know what is going on here Monday, example sub item number 2. Again, we can assign the owner. So let's say this is Alex, status AA, date we're not going to touch. The sequence is going to be, in this case, number 2. So the sequence number is number 2, create automation. So then we're going to go to the next step of the sequence. So create automation again. I'm just repeating myself now. So when sub item status changes to done, and only if the number meets the condition, the sequence number is equal to, in this case, number 2, then we want to go ahead and create sub item number 3. Create sub item. So then we go ahead and create sub item. This sub item is going to be, if it's going to let me again, example sub item number 3. Again, owner can be whoever, status, let's say AA, and this is sequence number 3. And we can literally create this process indefinitely. Okay, so we've got 1 to 2, 2 to 3. So now let me walk you through how this is going to work. I'm going to delete all of this to begin with. So just delete this, and then we'll add example item. Task type is going to be finance, create task. That shouldn't trigger anything. All that should happen now is one sub item should be created with the sequence number equal to number 1, and the date has automatically been set. So the due date for this particular sub item. So now imagine we are in the future a couple of days, and I have completed example sub item number 1. I'm going to go ahead and change the status to done. This will then trigger my automation to then create example sub item number 2, which is sequence number 2 of this process, setting the date column based on the date function that we've already set up. And then if I want to go ahead and change the status again, so let's say sub item number 2 is done, we've run through this, then sub item number 3 is going to appear, okay? As you can see here. Assigned to a different person, totally different sub item, but the date is the same because we're doing this immediately. We're doing this right now. But if it wasn't, it would be in the future. Now, if you want to get even more complicated, and you can continue to build this out as you see fit, the next thing that we might want to look at is a varying due date dependent on the sequence number. So we might say when sub item status changes to done, so that let's take the number 3, for example. So we'll recreate this again. Actually, let's just do number 2, then I don't have to run through them all. So create automation. When an item is, when sub item is created, and only if number meets condition, sequence is equal to, and then we would say 2 as an example, then set date, due date to today, and push date by however many days. Sorry for the pause there. So let's say this is 17 days, and let's just go 17 days in this instance. So when a sub item is created, and only if sub item sequence is equal to 2, then set sub item date to today, and then push sub item date by 17 days and create automation. So this is a different due date dependent on the sub item sequence. Where this gets even more complicated though is We then need to refer back to when a sub item is created, then set sub item date to today, and then push sub item date by 5 business days. So the issue you have here is you then need to go through the number meets condition is sequence number is greater than 2. And you would have to do the same for is less than 2 in a separate automation. Okay. So just as an example, I'm going to turn this off for the time being, and then we'll create example item number 2. Hopefully you're following along. I would totally understand if you weren't, because I'm not sure I'm following along. So example sub item number 2 has been created, or example item number 2 has been created with example sub item number 1. There's no date because we've not set up that date function. But if I then change the status of this to done, what's going to happen is example sub item number 2 is going to be created, which will trigger the date column, but it will push it by 17 days because the sequence number is equal to number 2. So it should say set date 4th and then 17 days, 21st. Okay, you get the idea now, right? So we could do it slightly differently in the sense that we could use a status column. So this is an alternative approach. This might be better. So we could have this as due date. You could call this whatever you want. But essentially what we're going to say is where a sub item is equal to 5 days, then it's going to set the due date for 5 days. Where a sub item is equal to 17 days, it's going to set the due date for 17 days. This, I appreciate this might be quite backwards, but might actually be a better way of doing it than the sequence. So I'll just make this really, really small. It's tiny. And then we go to automate again. And then for sub item creation number 1, when an item is created, create sub item, we're going to set the due date for this one for 5 days. Okay, so we're just mapping this and then hit update automation. So now what we're going to have is we're going to have when an item is created, no, not that one. We'll have this one. When an item is created, set sub item date to today and then push sub item date by 5 business days. What we're going to do is we're going to add a filter, and we're going to say, and only where the status of the due date is equal to 5 days, and then press update automation, and then we can turn it on. And then what I'll do is I'll revert back to the other sequence that we had set up. When sub item is created and only if sequence number is equal to number 2, we can actually delete this and instead have a status, and only if status due date is equal to 17 days, then set sub item date, and then let's just change this to business days. So this will be in January, I suspect, and then press update automation. So now what's going to happen is we need to update the sub item sequence number 2. So if we go to when sub item status change is done, and only if sub item sequence is equal to number 2, then we're creating number 3, or we would do number 1. Where's number 1? There we go. That's the one we probably want. So when sub item status changes to done, and only if sub item sequence is equal to 1, then sequence number 2 is going to be 17 days. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and press update automation. And then sequence number 3, let's just make that 5 days as well. It's important that we have a value here though, because otherwise nothing is going to run. So we'll set this to 5 days and then press update automation. So now if I go ahead and I create example item number 3, example item number 3, and then set the task type as finance, create task, what would then happen is my sub items are going to populate. So number 1 should automatically create, which it has done. It's got a value of 5 days, which means that that's going to set the automation to set the due date to 5 days time. I'll then change this to done. Example sub item number 2 has a due date of 17 days, working days. So the next sub item that is created in our sequence, which is taking a moment or two, but it should then run, example sub item number 2, which it has done. The value is 17 days, which means the due date is the 4th of December to the 29th of December. Okay, so that is the due date because that's 17 working days from today. And then if I change this status to done, it will then create the next sub item, but that is a 5-day due date. Okay, so what should then happen is the next sub item will be created, setting the due date for 5 days time, but that's 5 days from the date in which example sub item number 2 has been completed, which in a realistic situation is not going to be the same day. But in this particular instance, it is. So you can see here 11th, or the 4th, and then set to the 11th. Nice. So that's perfect. So now if we then go back to the finance tasks that we had, when an item is created and only if task type is finance, create a sub item and create a sub item, what I would then look to do is we just need to set the due date here. So we might say that this one is 5 days and then this one is 17 days. So two tasks triggered, or two sub items triggered by an item created where the task type is equal to finance, but the due date is different depending on the sub item. So I'm then going to go ahead and turn that on. Just make sure that's on. For some reason that doesn't work. And then what I'll do is I'll create example item number 4. Task type in this case is finance. So what's going to happen is it's going to create our 2 finance tasks immediately. And the first task, when I say task, I'm referring to sub item in the sequence. So we should have 3 sub items in total. 2 of the sub items are 5 days and 1 of the sub items is 17 days. So you can see here that these are now populated. We've got finance sub item number 2. The due dates have run differently dependent on the due date type, and there's only 1 sub item within our sequence. What I would do here is I would restrict the column editing. I'd do the same for the due date, and I would make it really, really, really small. You can even hide the column if you want to. So as opposed to restricting the column, you remove restriction and you can hide the column. So the members of the board cannot even see this column. They can't interact it. It's not going to mess with anything that they're doing. So that's pretty much it. That's how to automate sub items, automate the due date of sub items, automate the due date of sub items based on variables, and create sequences of sub items all within Monday.com. So hopefully this video has been helpful. If you would like us to help you set up Monday.com for your business, check out the link in the description below. Book a call with me. We would absolutely love to help. I appreciate this is quite confusing, but hopefully this video has helped somewhat at least. And then if there are more complex things that you are looking to do, we would gladly assist. So book a call using the link in the description below. Either way, thank you ever so much for taking the time to watch the video. I really do hope this has been useful, and will hopefully help you with your project management and your task management. And again, this is just scratching the surface. Then we can look at effort, we can look at resource tracking, we can have status columns which trigger status columns. We can get way more sophisticated. But thank you for watching. Book a call. I'll see you soon.